that in the 3rd century BC, Asoka, the emperor of the Mauryan Empire, put a halt to the battles for the welfare of his empire. The cause for this change in mindset was Asoka's newfound interest in Buddhism, which he'd go on to promote all throughout Asia. Asoka sent out many missionaries to spread the religion, as well as built many monuments. Among these was the great stupa at Sanchi, also known as the Sanchi Stupa. The monument is the oldest stone structure in India and has a rich history that spans from 260 BC to the 19th. The construction of the stupa was a multi-dynasty long project that began during the Mauryan dynasty and was overseen by Asoka. Asoka was the 3rd ruler of the Mauryan Empire of India and was known as a ruthless conqueror by many. In one of his most notable battles, he and his armies conquered the 3 kingdoms of Kalinga in a bloody battle. The battle was devastating and had a large amount of deaths and injuries, totaling around 100,000. Afterwards, Asoka was so traumatized by the bloodshed, he converted to Buddhism shortly after, vowing to never engage in war. In his famous 13th edict, he depicts his sorrows and regrets, saying, 150,000 persons were carried away captive, 100,000 were slain, and many times that number died. If the 100th part or 1,000th part were now to suffer the same fate, it would be a matter of regret. Asoka Edict 13, circa 257 AD. The now Buddhist Asoka was the first ruler to openly promote Buddhism, and he promoted the religion with great vigor. Asoka sent out many missionaries to spread Buddhism throughout Asia, as well as built many temples and monuments to worship the Buddha. He created monuments to showcase his newfound change in belief, including his famous edicts, as well as religious buildings called stupas. One of the more well-preserved is the Great Stupa at Sanchi. The stupa was built around 9 kilometers away from the town of Vidisha in the town of Sanchi, and is well known as Masatupa, which translates to Great Stupa. Asoka's wife, Devi, was born in Sanchi, and she and Asoka were married in the town, giving Asoka personal connections to the location, which might account for why it was so well taken care of. The original Asokan stupa was constructed from bricks, but during the 1st century BC, during the Sunga period, it was reconstructed. The structure underwent major changes and additions during this time, which are the ones that were later observed in the 19th century. The Great Stupa has detailed architecture that has thick roots into Buddhist history. Stupas are structures that are based on mandalas, which are models of the universe. They're Buddhist shrines, however, some stupas served as burial grounds for rulers before the Buddha lived. Stupa's architecture is based on the Buddha, however, people have various interpretations of the exact meaning, with some believing that the building is to model the Buddha's bodily proportions, while others believe it to show the top knot in the Buddha's hair. Either way, the stupas are shrines dedicated to the Buddha and have become a common staple of Buddhist architecture. The stupa at Sanchi showcases many of the key features of a stupa, including the dome-shaped roof, which is called an anda. The anda is the main body of the stupa and represents the world mountain. Coming through the center of the anda towards the top of the stupa is the yasti. The region where the yasti and the anda meet symbolizes the axis mundi, which is where the heaven reaches the earth. On the yasti, there are 3 discs called Shrihevali, and are called kshatras for short. The 3 kshatras represent the Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama, the Dharma, the rule, and the Sangha, the people, which are known as the 3 jewels of baptism. Surrounding the anda is a railing called the medhi, and surrounding the entire structure is a vedika, low wall with taranas, ceremonial gateways at the 4 cardinal points. Each tarana is composed of 2 square posts that are topped with architraves. On the taranas, there are large carvings of animals, plants, and dwarves, and serve as some of the most identifiable parts of the Sanchi stupa. The entire sculpture is covered in complex relief sculptures that tell stories about the Buddha's life and previous lives, scenes of early Buddhism, as well as the names of people who helped construct the monument. Despite all the detailed carvings, you cannot enter the stupa if just visiting, and once you've gone through the tarana, then you've technically entered the stupa. The architecture and symbolism behind the Sanchi stupa is incredibly great, and when combined with the fact that the stupa is the oldest stone structure in India, it shows just how sacred the stupa is. Despite how valued the stupa was, over the centuries it was used less and less, and after the British colonization of India in the 17th century AD, the monument was forgotten. However, in 1818, the British sent General Taylor and a team on an expedition where they rediscovered the stupa. Upon their visit, they saw that the stupa was varied in vegetation, but well preserved nonetheless. Although General Taylor and his team wouldn't do anything to uncover the monument at the time, a century later, in 1912, John Marshall, third director of archaeology, would. He and his team organized an academic survey of the Sanchi Stupa, and after 7 years, in 1919, when the survey was complete, Marshall put an order out for restoration for the stupa. After the restoration, John Marshall released a detailed report on the stupa titled A Guide to Sanchi, where he went into detail about what he and his staff discovered at the stupa. His research was funded by UNESCO, and he was able to publish a lengthy report on the monument in 1940. Despite the assumption that the British would have left out key details and paraphrased the history, John Marshall went into great detail about the history of not just the monument, but the various stupas around Sanchi. In his guide, Marshall goes into detail not just about Asoka's construction, but the various rebuilds and additions to the monument. He prefaces his book by saying, "I shall divide it into 3 periods. The first extending in the reign of Asoka to overthrow of the Kshatrapa power, about 400 AD, by Chandragupta II. The second advent of the imperial Guptas to the death of the Emperor Harsha in 647 AD. And the third embracing the later medieval period." A Guide to Sanchi, Marshall, Chapter 7. He then goes in to describe each of the periods of the stupa in great detail, beginning with a lengthy history of Asoka and the Mauryan Empire. In his book, he not only goes into detail about the stupa's history, but also the topography, geography, and architecture of the stupa and Sanchi. John Marshall and General Taylor's contributions to the modern world's knowledge of Sanchi and ancient Buddhism are great and significant, uncovering history that would have otherwise been lost. The Great Stupa at Sanchi, also called Sanchi Stupa, is an important monument to ancient India and has a complex history that lasts over the course of many centuries. From the stupa's initial construction in the 3rd century BC to the British rediscovery of the monument, the long and detailed history is nothing short of great, as its name would suggest. When one studies the monument, they learn more than just architecture, but also about Asoka and his journeys with Buddhism, British occupation in India, as well as how monuments can be lost and rediscovered through time.